Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Today we're going to continue what we did before, and we were talking about the story of Prophet Musa alayhi salam within Surah Al-Araf, and we talked about how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala they were split into different nations and they were into different tribes, and how some of them reacted to the Prophet Prophet's orders, and how some of them they basically wanted to interpret, or let's say change the orders that Prophet Musa alayhi salam had ordered them with to suit their likes. And just very similar to today, in where the idea is really the same, in where you will get the pressure of whether it's a personal nafs, individual nafs, or whether it is the nafs that is coming from outside. And what we mean by the nafs coming from the outside, we mean the pressures of different lobbies that are pressuring the ummah, pressuring the Muslims, pressuring those that adhere to the word of the Lord Almighty, in order to reinterpret it according to the pressures, or according to the likes of the masses. Just like today, in where we're getting a wave of what is called progressive Islam, or a wave that are wanting an Islam that is, I would say, dancing on the tune of postmodernism, or dancing on the tune of liberalism, in order to make it somehow liberal friendly, Western friendly, you can call it secular friendly, feminist friendly, and the list goes on and on. That way they won't feel different. But in Islam, of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is always warning the ummah of dancing to the tune of those that are wanting to stick to their pleasures, or live based on their pleasures. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is always warning us of that. So that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually tells us the story of how the story began with the previous nations, whether it's Bani Israel or others, and how it resulted to a path that is very distant from the path of the Lord Almighty. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that's where the story begins. Watch out to be one of those same characters that might do the same. So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us the story of Bani Israel, and after telling us the story, tells us the conclusion that resulted after changing the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and says فَخَلَفَ مِن بَعْدِهِمْ خَلْفٌ وَرِثُوا الْكِتَابَ يَأْخُذُونَ عَرَضَ هَذَا الْأَدْنَى وَيَقُولُونَ سَيُغْفَرُ لَنَا. So what happened? فَخَلَفَ, meaning that later, after that particular nation had deceased or had passed, there came another after them. There came another khalfun. Khalfun, here's one thing. It didn't say khalafun, although there is a qira'ah where it says khalafun. What's the difference between khalfun with a sukoon and khalafun with no sukoon but with a fatha? So if we would read فَخَلَفَ مِن بَعْدِهِمْ خَلْفٌ, that would actually mean that right after them came a more backward, a more, let's say, deluded generation, and that was coming after them. In other words, when the line goes in a crooked path, those that come later will actually take even a more crooked path, because the previous nation had actually paved the way for a more crooked path. And that's why when we might think of, well, what happened? Why is the society today that far away from truth? Well, it didn't start from today. It actually started from the years that came before. They paved the way for such a delusion. And that's the same thing. A lot of times the parents, the previous generation, paves the way for either a khalfun, for a more backward step, or can actually take an advancement, and actually that advancement itself can pave the way for a better path, for a better generation. And that's why when we look at, for example, children, we could always see, alhamdulillah, based on the parents, they would pave the way for either piety, or pave the way for the future, for the future of that generation to even be on a higher delusion. Yet, if we were to say khalafun, the word khalafun, if it is with a fatha, would just mean another generation that came after them. But here, it actually it made it with the sukoon khalfun. They were not only a generation that came later, but they were also a more backward generation. They were even worse than the previous generation. Warithul kitab. What did they inherit? Well, they did indeed inherit the book. What book? They did indeed inherit the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is the Torah here. They inherited the book, but again, unfortunately, they did not actually take the book by the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They had actually changed the words of Allah Almighty to suit their likes. يأخذون عرض هذا الأدنى ويقولون سيغفر لنا. Now this is a main ayah to focus on, because what they took was they actually took عرض هذا الأدنى, meaning that they just took the surface of this adna. What is this adna? The surface of this world. فخلف, just like in Surah Maryam, فخلف من بعدهم خلف أضاعوا الصلاة واتبعوا الشهوات. They actually started with being pacified away from their prayers, and then واتبعوا الشهوات, and that later that actually paved the way for them to follow their desires and their whims. And then they would always give those excuses for themselves, and then they would say, we will just be forgiven. In other words, they completely considered and completely did not look at the sins that were committed as of a big deal, and in fact only saw it that it was just a trivial matter. Don't take it too seriously. Just move on and don't focus on feeling the guilt of it, and just move on and enjoy the pleasure of it. وَيَأْتِهِمْ عَرَضٌ مِثْلُهُ يَأْخُذُوا. Not only did they take the surface of it, but even if they were to be granted more of this dunya, they would be willing to go more and more in delusion. They would be willing to delve deeply and go deeply in the pleasures of this dunya. أَلَمْ يُؤْخَذْ عَلَيْهِمْ مِيثَاقُ الْكِتَابِ. Did they not? Were they not? It wasn't it taken upon them that they would take mithaqul kitab, that they would take seriously the convent of the book that is the Torah, or the book, al-kitab here is the Torah, but it can also include, for us to understand, it is the teaching and the core of the books that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had sent down. أَلَّا يَقُولُوا عَلَى اللَّهِ إِلَّا الْحَقِّ. What was mithaqul kitab? What was the convent of the book? That they would only say the truth about the Lord Almighty. Yet, what did they do? Darasu ma fi. Darasu ma fi. They wiped away, they washed away the truth that was in it, and then, as if it did not even exist. Why? They wiped it away and just simply considered their new whims as the ones to interpret and bring about the signs and the words of the Lord Almighty. But, of course, reinterpreted those words. وَالدَّارُ الْآخِرَةُ خَيْرُ الَّذِينَ يَتَّقُونَ. وَالدَّارُ الْآخِرَةُ. Now, the word ad-dar actually means home. And it also means chamber. And it also means the place that you stay in, the place of residence. Al-akhirah. But here's the thing. The Darul Akhirah, when we say Al-akhirah, means the last. In other words, it basically had given us that idea and that understanding that your home that you're living in this dunya is extremely temporary, and that on Judgment Day, that is the real home. That is Darul Akhirah. That is the true, and that is the last home, and that is the home you will be living in forever and ever. That's why Al-Akhirah, Al-akhirah means the last destination. And the last destination is telling us that this is just your first destination. The destination that you should be concerned about is really the last destination. Khair, and that is better. But who would that last destination be better for? لِلَّذِينَ يَتَّقُونَ. For those that have taqwa. What is taqwa? The word taqwa, I think I explained it many times, in where the word taqwa, I would more say it is religious integrity in where the person is living based on the Lord Almighty's principles, but with integrity. And the integrity is that they would carry that the Lord Almighty is overlooking everything that they are doing. أفلا تعقلون. Why أفلا تعقلون? Do they not comprehend or understand what we are saying? What is what they're saying? What is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying? So here, أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ, this is basically telling us, well, you know, the people of the book and those that got the Torah or Al-Injil, when they actually received the message, they actually hid all the different messages that were already in it, that were clear as what the Lord Almighty is asking them to do. Yet they just wanted to focus on this life and forgot that the most important part of it, and this is why it said أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ, because they were so pacified, didn't realize that what was more important in this life is really the purpose of it and not the surface of it. So it's this purpose of life and not the surface of life. But then, because they were focusing on the surface and not the purpose, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ. Do they not comprehend? Do they not focus? Do they not see the rationality behind life, that what matters about it is really the purpose and not the surface? وَالَّذِينَ يُمَسِّكُونَ بالكتاب وأقاموا الصلاة إنا لا نضيع أجر المصلحين. Yet on the other hand, it's always the pattern in the Quran, in where when it talks about kufr, then it lays out iman. When it talks about Jannah, it lays out nar. When it talks about dunya, it will lay out the akhirah. Always those comparisons are always there. So here, after speaking about those that the generations that came later, it definitely will always be talking about the other generations who وَالَّذِينَ يُمَسِّكُونَ. I want you to look at the word يُمَسِّكُونَ, because there are a number of different things. Number one, it's a present tense. When we say present tense, sorry, my laptop keeps doing, I don't know, these weird, funny things. Let's see if it does it here. There's number one, there's the, oh, sorry about that. No. So again, my laptop keeps doing these weird things. I think the screen is just not happy. Oh boy, what happened? Oh no. La ilaha illallah, what happened? Come on. So, وَالَّذِينَ يُمَسِّكُونَ. There are a number of things to look at the word yumassikun. First, it's a present tense. What is that telling us? Well, that's telling us that it's it's the determination to do an action. It's a constant thing that they were living on. It's the principle that they were holding on to it from the past to the future to the present. That's why it actually used the present tense. Now, the other part was yumassikuna. And when you look at the word yumassikuna, you could see the shadda. The shadda gives a number of different things. Number one, repetitive action. And number two, the deep connection. So when you look at a shadda on a verb, it is basically emphasizing that they were going deep in it, two, that they were holding strongly onto that matter. So what were they doing? The word masaka means to hold on. Now the word yumessik or yumsik on its own actually means to stay holding on, and yumassik actually means to stay holding on and be strong. In other words, to strongly hang on, to strongly hold on to something. To strongly hold on to something is really what the word yumassikun actually presents. What were they holding on, and what does it mean to hold on? So, two things. Number one, they were holding on to the words of the book, the words of the Quran, the words of the Torah, or the words of the Lord Almighty. And number two, there's no way that you can hold on to the book and hold on to the message if you're not actually putting it in application. So they were putting it in application, and they were actually hanging on to the wording from getting lost. What? Bil kitab. Bil kitab means with the book. What book? It's basically the Torah, or the words of the Lord Almighty. Wa aqamu salah. In other words, in order to be consistent and to be strong and holding on to the book of the Lord Almighty, they always needed to be consistent, even in salah. Wa aqamu salah. And they were performing the salah. So why is it that this is actually a present tense and this is a past tense? So they were constant, and yumassikuna is actually speaking about that present. They're constantly doing it. And aqamus salata, that they were performing the salah, and they were also holding on. They were holding on to every single piece of it, including salah. إنا لا نضيع أجر المصلحين. The Lord Almighty, لا نضيع. The Lord Almighty does not ignore or get any deed, any good deed, to not be considered or lost. أجر المصلحين. Why أجر? أجر means the reward. المصلحين. Why المصلحين and not الصالحين? So al-muslih is the person that corrects after others destructing something. All right? So why did it say that? Well, remember, this is speaking about those that correct after destruction. And this is speaking about those that destructed after having something that was constructed already. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is comparing the two. Those that had destructed even more after having a construction. Remember, they had warithul kitab. They already had a construction, that is the book of the Lord Almighty, that is the divine message. But then you also had others that did otherwise. They actually constructed what others destructed. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّا لَا نُضِيعُ أَجْرَ الْمُصْلِحِينَ, that the Lord Almighty does not let any reward, any good reward of those that reconstruct what others have deconstructed. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is comparing these two. That's why when we're looking at لا نضيع أجر المصلحين, remember, this ayah is coming even after the story. The last story that was mentioned was really the story of the three parties. The one party that was doing the sin, the second party that was ordering for what is good and forbidding what is bad, and the third party that was telling the second party, why are you wasting your time on these people? You already know beforehand that they're going to be people of destruction, people of punishment. So why waste your time on it? What did the second group say? Well, they said, مَعْذِرَةً إِلَى رَبِّكُمْ. That we're just doing this as a ma'ذِرة, as an excuse in the Lord of in front of the Lord Almighty, that we did what we can in order to have these people stay on the right path. So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is also including إِنَّا لَا نُضِيعُ أَجْرَ الْمُصْلِحِينَ, meaning even those that construct what others have deconstructed, that the Lord Almighty will not get their rewards at all, ever get lost or ever get disregarded. And this is really important to mention, that one of the things and one of the most important deeds is basically the deed that one does to reconstruct, to construct and reconstruct what others have what others have torn down, what others have deconstructed. And that's the hardest thing in da'wah, by the way, in where you're going to find a lot of attack, a lot of a lot from the Muslim community, especially. For within the Muslim community, the let me say that the stab is even tougher than the stab of those that are already known to being enemies against Islam. Because within the Muslim community, you will find, and this is so common when you would do any type of activism. I mean, do chaplaincy at a Catholic university, and it's so sad to admit that the Muslims that will stand against you, and even it's so embarrassing when you would give a lecture, probably in front of 300 and 400 people, and then it's the Muslims that will stand up to say that what you are saying is not even Islam, and that what you are saying is against the teachings of Islam, even though you're specialized. But it is the first one to actually challenge you is really the Muslims. The ones to go against you, the ones to fight against you, whether on campus or whether in what's it called, in the parliament or in political areas, the first ones to fight against you are really the Muslims. It is extremely sad to actually admit that. And that's the same thing when we're talking about activism. When you're trying to do activism, for example, in refuting atheism, the ones to go against you are probably going to be from this group or that group, accusing you of probably misunderstanding, or probably doing the wrong thing, or probably you're not on aqidat salaf, or probably you're just your intention is not in place, and the list goes on and on and on. And that becomes this distraction that takes away a lot of the activism. And it's really sad when many times it can happen where it will take away your energy, instead of it being focused where on areas that are most important. Then our energy starts getting shifted into an area where that shouldn't be the main focus. In where you would see, when we're talking about Islam and women, etc., you would see a large group then of the Muslims that are again playing this tune of misogyny, and playing this tune of being feminist and etc. And you're like, where do I begin? Do I begin fixing my own home, or do I begin with protecting my home from all the different rocks that are thrown at us from the outside? That's a really hard thing to do, because you're getting rocks that are thrown at you from the outside, trying to take away your deen, trying to take away your if we would want to imagine our deen and the Muslim ummah as a house, all right? The pillars that make up the house standing is really the aqidah. And then the doors or the walls are pretty much the sharia itself. And then those that are inside that home standing with you are basically the Muslim ummah. And then when you're trying to keep those enemies out and trying to make sure that those rocks don't hit anybody within your own home, then unfortunately you discover that within your own home somebody has a dagger that is getting stabbed into your back. Somebody is right there trying, while you're trying to protect and keep those rocks away from hitting your own home or hitting from anybody within your own home that is the Muslim Ummah. Somebody else right there is trying to put your hand down, and they're trying to keep you back. And this is the sad reality that we're living in where our own ummah has become an enemy to itself. But in the end, إِنَّا لَا نُضِيعُ أَجْرَ الْمُصْلِحِينَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not whatsoever get any of the rewards of those that will attempt to do any correction. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not get their reward lost. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us one of those. وَإِذْ نَتَقْنَا الْجَبَلَ فَوْقَهُمْ كَأَنَّهُ ظُلَّةٌ وَظَنُّوا أَنَّهُ وَاقِعٌ بِهِمْ خُذُوا مَا آتَيْنَاكُمْ بِقُوَّةٍ وَاذْكُرُوا مَا فِيهِ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds Bani Israel that we're listening to this. When the mountain, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had risen it up above them as if it was a whole cloud up above them. وَظَنُّوا أَنَّهُ وَاقِعٌ بِهِمْ, to the point that they actually thought that the mountain was going to fall over their heads. خُذُوا مَا آتَيْنَاكُمْ بِقُوَّةٍ, when they were ordered, take what was delivered onto you, the message, بِقُوَّةٍ, with strength, with confidence. In other words, don't weaken because of the society around you, or weaken because of those that might try to seize the moment of you getting weaker and weaker in holding on to the word of the Lord Almighty. وَاذْكُرُوا مَا فِيهِ. How do you actually stay holding strongly and holding strong onto the word of the Lord Almighty? Two things. You act upon it. And two, first thing, you act upon it yourself, بِقُوَّةٍ, with complete confidence. That's what it means, بِقُوَّةٍ. You're strong. You're defending it. You're acting upon it. You're not weakening, even though you might find a lot of mockery that may be surrounding you to take away your confidence that this is the truth. And then, وَاذْكُرُوا مَا فِيهِ. وَاذْكُرُوا مَا فِيهِ, mention, tell out loud, speak about it. Why? Because the second that you speak about it, that's when you will pass on the message, and you will then be able to do that da'wah, to deliver it in where you yourself, even da'wah, believe it or not, the most time that I would feel that, call it iman hype in me, is really when I'm giving a lecture or when I'm speaking about Islam, etc. Because it's not that I don't feel that I'm giving it to others. I feel that I'm speaking to myself. I'm taking that moment to learn it. I'm taking that moment. And alhamdulillah, with Zoom, I'm actually loving it, ironically. But with Zoom, you're just sitting in this room where I have right in front of me just white all over me. It's like a white sheet upon white sheet. That way I could clearly and I could, be clear in my thoughts and focus. And then that will bring about, when you're doing the da'wah, what you're doing, you're actually not only speaking to others, but you're enhancing the iman inside of you. So da'wah giving, which is وَاذْكُرُوا مَا فِيهِ, it's basically in order to empower you by giving you that quwwah, that quwwah comes with you feeling the power, with you standing strong to speak about it and don't change the Lord Almighty's words to suit what others want to hear. لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ, so that you may enhance taqwa. When you look at the word tattaqun, there are actually a number of things in the word tattaqun. Again, it's the present form. And number two, there's the shadda again. Very similar to the word that we actually talked about earlier, in where yumassikuna bil kitab, in where it was talking about here, yumassikun, there's the present tense and there's the shadda. Two things. When we're looking at a shadda and when we're looking at a present tense, in other words, you could see that these people are consistent. And here, لَعَلَّكُمْ, the word لَعَلَّ is a form of hope, a higher probability that might take place. And of course, when we're speaking about higher probability, there's a higher chance that taqwa and religious integrity will be taking place. But when the person takes the words of the Lord Almighty biquwwa, with confidence, with strength, and that would include implementation in action. And then the second part, doing the da'wah. Don't just practice it on your own, but make it something that you deliver, that you live by. That is a mission. So not only do you live by it, but you make it into a mission. وَاذْكُرُوا مَا فِيهِ, in where the person is taking it as a mission in passing it on. And that in the end, so add these two together. Let's do this little math. Quwwah, 2 plus making it as a mission will equal the possibility of getting taqwa. Not only the possibility of getting taqwa, but the possibility of staying, again, the present form is reflecting a higher possibility of the person being consistent in living the path of religious integrity. The word tattaqun, the shadda, is actually meaning not only consistent, but is repetitive. In other words, it is that consistency, it is that repetitive mode that they're living in. And the word taqwa, in where they're protecting themselves from any type of, and it didn't say لَعَلَّكُمْ تُفْلِحُونَ, it said لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. And the word taqwa actually means to put a shield. The word taqwa in itself, it's to put a shield. So here, لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ, in other words, in order for you to put the shield and to be consistent in protecting your identity, there's one, you have to have the quwwah, you have to have the strength and the confidence. 2, you have to make it as a mission, and that's what will make it that shield of taqwa to protect you from falling in the path of those that are deviant. وَإِذَا خَذَ رَبُّكَ مِنْ بَنِي آدَمَ مِنْ ظُهُورِهِمْ. Now it tells us and continues into the same story. Well, what really happened, and why do we really need that shield? Well, the story actually began when the Lord Almighty, your Lord, He took from the backs of the children of Adam, ذُرِّيَّتَهُمْ, all the different descendants, all the different dhurriya, all the generations, all the children of Adam were taken. وَأَشْهَدَهُمْ عَلَىٰ أَنفُسِهِمْ. I want you to look at the word أَشْهَدَهُمْ عَلَىٰ أَنفُسِهِمْ, because there are a number of different things here. أَشْهَدَهُمْ means made them witnesses. عَلَىٰ أَنفُسِهِمْ, on themselves. أَلَسْتُ بِرَبِّكُمْ, am I not your Lord Almighty? And here's the thing. When we look at the word أَشْهَدَهُمْ, أَلَسْتُ بِرَبِّكُمْ, 2 things here. Number 1 is that أَشْهَدَهُمْ عَلَىٰ أَنفُسِهِمْ, He made them witnesses to actually see this whole dialogue taking place. Number 2, Did the Lord Almighty actually reveal himself when he said, Alastu bi rabbikum? Did he reveal himself in front of them? No, he didn't. He actually made them witness ashhadahum ala anfusihim. He made them see their own creation. He made them see their existence. And by looking at their existence, by looking at the creation, that's when they were able to process the Lord Almighty's existence. Alastu bi rabbikum? Now that you see the creation, now that you see your own existence, do you witness that? Alastu bi rabbikum? Do you witness that I am your Lord? And then they said, قالوا بلى. They said, verily, we're witnessing it. Verily, we see it. Verily, we see it, but the seeing does not necessarily mean to see with the naked eye. Because recognition does not necessarily mean only with the naked eye. You recognize through your mind, you recognize through your senses, you recognize with your fitrah. So right here, this ayah is actually saying, بلا شهدنا. They said, قالوا بلا شهدنا على أن تقولوا يوم القيامة إنا كنا عن هذا غافلين. What is that telling us? I want you to look at these three dots right here. These three dots are actually meaning you're either going to stop at this one or you're going to stop at that one. How is the meaning going to change? So قالوا بلا شهدنا, they would say, verily we're witnesses. أن تقولوا يوم القيامة إنا كنا عن هذا غافلين. Yet on Judgment Day, you will say, we were pacified away from this. Let's read it the other way. قالوا بلا. They said, verily. شهدنا أن تقولوا. شهدنا أن تقولوا. We witness. And then the Lord Almighty responds that you will on Judgment Day say, we were pacified away from recognizing this. But remember, do any of us remember any of this? Absolutely not. We don't remember any of this taking place. Why don't we remember? Because memory is a result of a mind processing. This is not a mind processing. This is a fitrah processing. A fitrah processing is different than a mind processing because a mind process can only happen with you going into a situation and remembering it is based on you going through a process and recognizing with memory that this happened. But when your mind is not fully complete in its development, you're not capable of memorizing the different things that might have happened to you. You don't remember the day that you were born because your mind, your brain at least, didn't develop the necessary capacity to remember. And when we're talking about capacities, as human beings, we have different capacities, and part of that is the capacity of fitrah. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala here is speaking about the capacity of fitrah in where we recognize that there's something behind life. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ actually says, كُلُّ مَوْلُودٍ يُولَدُ عَلَى الْفِطْرَةِ. Every single newborn is born with a fitrah, with an instinct that is on the inside. Yet فَأَبَوَاهُ, his parents / environment, the community, may Jewidize him, make him a Jew, make him a Christian, or make him a Zoroastrian, or any other religion that you might think of. Religion is not only in their understanding of God, but religion could also mean the tradition that you take into practice, which is why when in Surah Yusuf ما كان ليأخذ أخاه في دين الملك, في دين الملك here, that he was not going to take his brother. In other words, do any wrong to his brother, fi din al malik, in the religion of the malik. But this deen doesn't mean deen to mean what creed, but it means the rule, the law, the tradition, the custom. And that's the same thing here, in where the society around you might make what and might design what you might see as right as wrong, and what you might see as wrong as right, and without you realizing. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is actually bringing it to our attention, that you've got the fitrah on the inside to help you research and recognize that there is a purpose to this life, that there is something behind life, not necessarily a God, because you don't recognize there's a God per se, because that actually came with al-wahi. It came with al-wahi to help you understand what is needed. If recognizing and believing in a God was something on the inside of you, and you didn't need a prophet and messengers, then there would be no need for a prophet and messengers. But the Lord Almighty sent the prophets and messengers in order to help you understand and answer the questions that are already in your instinct. So what happened? أن تقول يوم القيامة إنا كنا عن هذا الغافلين. Yet on Judgment Day, they will say that they were pacified away from, what is the word هذا relating to or referring to? إنا كنا عن هذا. They were pacified away from what? That there is the Lord Almighty. ألست بربكم? Am I not your Lord? And this is, or the word هذا, is referring to what the Lord Almighty had made them witnesses upon themselves. That is not your Lord Almighty, the one that created you. You see your creation, you recognize your creation, you recognize the creation around you. Therefore, you should be able to recognize through the creation a creator. And that's the fitrah. To recognize that behind this creation is a creator. But what happened? They will on Judgment Day say that they were ghafilin. What is the word ghafilin? Ghafilin means they were pacified away from it. In other words, they were so focused on the surface of things that they forgot. And the word forgot doesn't mean to forget mentally or mind, but they were pacified from focusing on what mattered the most, which is the purpose of life, and looked at the surface of life. And that's why they were ghafilin. They were pacified by looking at the surface, by getting into life, engaging into life, and looking at the pleasures of it, and not really considering the purpose and the core of this life. أو تقولوا, or they would say, إنما أشرك آباؤنا. It was our forefathers that had associated partners before us, and we're just a generation that came after them. Are we going to be punished for what the generation before us had mubtilun, what they had committed? But the word mubtilun actually leads it to a number of different things, because the word mubtil, remember, it's the opposite of muslih. Remember, إِنَّا لَا نُضِيعُ أَجْرَ الْمُصْلِحِينَ. And this here, il-mubtilun, is going into the same exact pattern to tell us, well, here they said, well, it's not our fault, in other words, that we are associating partners. In other words, we're worshiping other than God Almighty. It's our forefathers. It's the generation that came before us. And every generation is accusing the generation before them that they were the ones that started the misconception, the delusion, the wrong path. Therefore, they should be not held accountable, or at least according to them. So here, أفتهلكنا means, are you going to punish us for what المبطلون? So what did they يبطلوا? To use the word مبطل, so بطل, to تبطل الشيء actually means to void something. To void something, in other words, to stop it from functioning, to obstruct it from functioning the way it was designed to function. To obstruct something, to void something, and what is it they're referring to that it was being obstructed or that was being void from doing the function that it was created to do? And that's the fitrah. So they just basically said, when they had associated partners with the Lord Almighty, they wanted to respond when the Lord Almighty will tell them, well, you had it in your fitrah, I basically put it inside your instinct. So they went to say, well, our forefathers were the ones that obstructed our ability to recognize what you had instilled within us, which is the instinct. But of course, that will not pass as an excuse to not hold them accountable. So when you look at the word al-mubtilun, just understand, well, why al-mubtilun and not a different word? وَكَذَلِكَ نُفَصِّلُ الْآيَاتِ. So then it continues, and therefore the word كَذَلِكَ is to mean, and in that same pattern, in that same way, from that same argument, that is the word كَذَلِكَ. It's like from that same argument where they had claimed, well, there are other generations that obstructed the function of our fitrah, our ability to understand, our ability to process life and to understand the purpose of life. It's their fault. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, well, it is based from that argument. Here's why. نُفَصِّلُ الْآيَاتِ. We had brought in al-ayat. The word al-ayat means a number of different things. It can mean signs in the open book. What open book? In the world around you. Sun, moon, your own body, the sky, everything, every creation around you. That's the open book. And then there's the written book. The written book, which is the divine message that the Lord Almighty had sent, which are the verses that were sent with the prophets. And there are also il-ayat to mean the miracles that were sent with the prophets and the messengers. So كَذَلِكَ نُفَصِّلُ الْآيَاتِ, and in other words, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in order to refute that argument, and in order to not give them the excuse that they had an excuse to get deluded or to stay away from the Lord Almighty's words, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, well, that's why the ayat, the signs, the verses, the miracles, nufassil, they were actually mufassala, they were in detail. The word nufassil is a reflection of, to mean, one, they were detailed, two, they were clear and not ambiguous. So nufassil is to bring about the boundaries, to make it clear, and to make the signs also clear in order for others to recognize it, and to also make sure that the details are there to help the people that want to follow the message say, well, I could see the boundaries. وَلَعَلَّهُمْ يَرْجِعُونَ. So that the word لَعَلَّهُمْ, here's again, it appeared before that, لَعَلَّهُمْ, and we talked about it earlier, the word لَعَلَّهُمْ, so that they may. But this is not that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, here we go, here's لَعَلَّكُمْ and here's لَعَلَّهُمْ. So here's لَعَلَّكُمْ and لَعَلَّهُمْ. لَعَلَّكُمْ, so that you may. So why here لَعَلَّكُمْ and here لَعَلَّهُمْ? لعلكم, because the words were directed at the Salihin, so that you may get taqwa with this one. But لعلهم يرجعون, because this is talking about the disbelievers anyways. This is not talking to the disbelievers, but this is talking about them. لعلهم يرجعون, so that they would may, or that they may go back. Go back? Back where? So there we go. Let's go back and see. يرجعون to what? To go back to what? To go back to their fitrah. All right? To go back to the fitrah that they were created with. To go back to the instinct that the Lord Almighty had created within them. In other words, the Lord Almighty had sent the signs and the messages and the verses and all the different messages in order to help the children of Adam find the truth by knowing and recognizing the relationship between the ayat and the relationship, or how it relates to the instinct that they actually had within them already. But of course, when لعلهم يرجعون, what happens is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala again tells us the same pattern with the same stories in order to see, well, how did people relate with the fitrah or with the ayat, and what did they do with them. وَاتْلُ عَلَيْهِمْ نَبَأَ الَّذِي آتَيْنَاهُ آيَاتِنَا, and tell them the story. نَبَأَ الَّذِي آتَيْنَاهُ آيَاتِنَا, the one that was granted the ayat, the signs, the message. In other words, they had already some information. Now, the word, this story, scholars actually had differences of opinions on who really was this referring to. Was this referring to the people of the book, in where they had already known that there was going to be a prophet coming? But فَانْسَلَخَ مِنْهَا, yet the word insalakha actually means exacerbated. So in other words, they were living in those verses. They knew very well that there was a prophet coming, but then فَانْسَلَخَ مِنْهَا, yet they exacerbated the identity, the idea, the whole creed that they were once embracing so strongly. But they exacerbated, they totally separated themselves away from what used to be part of their identity at one point. When the people of the book in Medina, specifically the Yahud, were always bragging to the residents of Medina that there was going to be a coming prophet that they were going to be uniting with, and that they will one day actually attack or fight the Arab of Medina by following this prophet. The pagan Arabs did not whatsoever know what they were talking about. They just mocked at them. Whatever you're talking about, they considered. But it isn't until when they had gone to Mecca and the Prophet ﷺ happens to encounter some of them, and that they had become Muslim. And that's when they go back to Medina, and of course when the Yahud realized that the Prophet wasn't from Bani Israel, that's when they totally exacerbated themselves from the identity, from the creed that they had once embraced of a coming prophet. And that's why that opinion actually, when we're looking at the opinion that says that this was talking about the people of the book, this is the context that it would be in. The other opinion is that it was that was relating and referring to a guy named Bil'am. Bil'am, he was mentioned in the Torah, and this man that was mentioned in the Torah, in where Bal'am ibn Ba'ura, when he was mentioned in the Torah that he was a prophet according to the book that they have right now, that he was a prophet, and then that this prophet had actually went against Prophet Musa alayhi salam. Again, this is This is in their Torah that is muharrafa. This is in their Torah that was muharrafa. This is not whatsoever in the Quran. It's not supported by Quran at all. So anyhow, so when we're looking at the other interpretation is that this was actually talking and referring to Quraysh, that they had received the message, but فَانْسَلَخَ مِنْهَا, that this is talking about the people of Quraysh, that they received the message, but they totally exacerbated from themselves away from the truth, away from the Prophet, peace be upon him. فأتبعه الشيطان فكان من الغاوين. Then فأتبعه الشيطان. Then shaitan, because these people had actually built the foundation that they wanted to separate themselves away from the truth, that's when shaitan started following them. In other words, they became an easy target for the shaitan to delude them. فَكَانَ مِنَ الْغَاوِينَ, and they were from al-ghawin. The word ghawi, all right, the word ghawi, il-ghawi is the person that takes their own senses, their own whims as, let's call it, the compass that they would follow in order to design or at least pave the way to what destination they go to. So fakana min al-ghawin, in here this is talking to us that they basically had the wrong compass. They had their whims pave the path to them, and then the shaitan followed them and continued paving the wrong way for them, and then they ended up min al ghawin. Where did it start? Well, they ended up following just their whims, because shaitan would beautify their whims for them and make them feel that they're actually doing the right thing, and it feels good to follow that path. وَلَوْ شِئْنَا لَرَفَعْنَاهُ بِهَا. It's really important here is that نَبَأَ الَّذِي أَتَيْنَاهُ آيَاتِنَا, so that they actually have the ilm. They had the ilm. All right, they had the ilm, but they did not want to live based on that ilm. They had the knowledge about it, but they exacerbated themselves. They distanced themselves away from this knowledge. And it's really scary, because someone can have the knowledge, but then their heart goes somewhere else and they become min al-ghawin. They can have the knowledge, they can know the truth, they can recognize it, they know what's right, but then their heart actually distances them from following the principles of the Lord Almighty, because they were so focused on following their whims. There is this hadith which scholars actually had differences of opinions on the authenticity of this hadith, and finally it was recognized by a lot of scholars that it is Hasan. So it's a type of authentic hadith, but the wording is not so strong in being strongly authentic as the highly authentic, in where the Prophet ﷺ actually says, العلم علمان علم في القلب فذلك العلم النافع وعلم على اللسان فذلك حجة الله تعالى. What does that mean? Ilm and knowledge is two kinds. Knowledge that is in the heart, فذلك العلم النافع, that is the beneficial knowledge, and another knowledge that appears on the tongue, and that is Hujjatullah. That is Hujjatullah. It's like the argument or the articulation, not articulation, maybe I could say the eloquence that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will put in people's tongues. And this is really important when we're talking about how we deliver the message there, or how we understand the ilm. It's not enough to have mind knowledge. And I must admit, the sincerity that you would find in a lot of those that are simple, those that are poor, those that might not have had the highest degrees, might actually be stronger than many that you had seen with top degrees, with very high degrees, even in Islamic studies. Even in Islamic studies. And I say this often in where when I went to Kulit al-Sharia, I actually thought that I was going to find those professors as the Sahaba. But then when I started teaching Islam in al-Masjid al-Aqsa, when I started teaching Islam in al-Masjid al-Aqsa, that's when I started seeing that the people that had the highest sincerity, the strongest sincerity, the most transparent, the most beautiful in their iman were really those people that were coming to the dars, really simple in their knowledge about the deen, but they were so sincere. You could talk to them, and their ilm in the deen is really is really simple. Some of them couldn't even read the Fatiha. And I really mean it. Some of them couldn't even read the Fatiha. But you saw how beautiful their iman was. You saw how the, I don't know what to say, but you saw the soft heart in them through their words, through their tongues, through their actions. And I would remember those moments when I was teaching in Al Masjid Al Aqsa, and I would be, giving the dars. I was just an undergrad at the time, giving the dars, and I was preparing and preparing and preparing, and I was wanting to give those durus, at a high level and all that. And then I remember I had prepared a dars in fiqh. And when we were talking about fiqh, you're going to talk about sophisticated terminologies. You're going into jargons and you're talking about these big things. And here's the dalil and here's the evidence. And this scholar said and that scholar said. And here it is. And sometimes you just want to, I would say you want to show off your knowledge. And you fall in this. And then you realize these people will teach you a lesson. Don't show off your knowledge. It's not about showing off your knowledge. And I remember sitting in Al Masjid Al Aqsa, and I had prepared about fiqh, family fiqh. And an older lady, almost 80 something years old, she was sitting on a chair. And then she said, I don't want you to teach us about fiqh of marriage. I don't want to learn about the fiqh of marriage. So I said, okay, Hajja, why don't you just hold on and I'll give you another dars. She was like, no, I just want tafsir Surah Al-Waqi'ah. I said, okay, Hajja, I'll do tafsir Surah Al-Waqi'ah later on. And then she held her cane and she was like, you do tafsir Surah Al-Waqi'ah or I'll hit you with this cane. So I was like, okay, I don't want to be attacked in the masjid. All right, everyone, we're going to do tafsir Surah Al-Waqi'ah. And then she was like, very well, now you know your duty's right. I started doing tafsir Surah Al-Waqi'ah, but then I wanted to go in that Lugha Arabiya and speak about the, kind of like what we're doing right now and speak about present and Madi and past and all these different things. And this is Harf Jar and this is Harf Jazm and all that stuff. And she was like, what are you talking about? That's not how I want you to do tafsir Surah Al-Waqi'ah. I was like, what do you want me to say? She was like, just be simple. Quran is simple. I said, okay. So I started going down and down and down in the level of my talk. And then when I got to the ayah, إِنَّا أَنشَأْنَاهُنَّ إِنشَاءً فَجَعَلْنَاهُنَّ أَبْكَارًا. When I got to the ayah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was going to recreate them, recreate women, and recreate the men, of course. فَجَعَلْنَاهُنَّ أَبْكَارًا, and that they will be recreated and they will be virgins again. And she said, so what does that mean? I said, well, it means Ya Hajja, she's 80 something years old, remember. I said, well, that actually means you're going to be young again. And you're not going to be an older lady like you are right now. And you're going to even be young, recreated young again. And she said, well, what about my husband? I really love my dear husband. He passed away a long time ago, but I really want my husband back. He said, don't worry, Hajjah, you'll get your husband back again. And not only that, but you will be young and you will be, as the ayah actually said, عُرُبًا أَتْرَابًا. You will be in the same age, young, etc., and you will be uruba. Uruba means you will be loving your husband dearly, and he will be loving you dearly. And oh man, that moment when I said that, she started crying as if it was the first time she had ever heard it. She started crying and hugging me, and I remember those tears. I'm sure the lady had passed away by now. So that was probably 23 years back from now. And just to remember, you know, looking at her crying and hugging me and and living the moment as if she just entered Jannah and that she just became young again. That moment in where I started crying myself because I had known that for such a long time, but I wasn't crying for the same reason she was crying in. She was crying because she was really feeling the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that they're truth and nothing but the truth. And she was really feeling it with her heart. But then I was crying because I had already known that. I had the knowledge about that. But I didn't get the same sense. And it didn't, let me say, touch me the same way that it touched her. Maybe because I was young at the time, didn't understand how it and what it meant to her as an older woman to tell her that she will be young again and that she would be back with her with her husband, the love of her life. Maybe I just didn't feel it at the time. And subhanallah, that's the thing, is that when you're so engaged in learning the ideas, that many times you're just so focused on getting the information in your head and not in your heart. It so happens so many times. And that's when we learn Sharia, that's the same thing. We're so focused on learning the ideas in our minds and not taking the moments to let those ideas go deep in our hearts and let them touch and even affect our own skin, to have that qasharira, to have that the goosebumps, to have the feelings, to have the tears coming with it, to let it touch every single part of our body. And that's why this ayah, it really scares me when you look at آتَيْنَاهُ آيَاتِنَا. Did he or did they recognize it with their mind? They sure did. وَلَوْ شِئْنَا لَرَفَعْنَاهُ بِهَا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and if we would have wanted, we would have even risen him at a higher rank with that same knowledge. Yeah, they could have been probably the scholars of their time, the great people of their time. وَلَكِنَّهُ أَخْلَدَ إِلَى الْأَرْضِ. But that person, despite the knowledge that they had chosen أَخْلَدَ إِلَى الْأَرْضِ. They had chosen to go deep down into earth. What does that mean? This is a metaphor. This is not a literal meaning. أَخْلَدَ إِلَى الْأَرْضِ. It doesn't mean that they chose to, I don't know, dig a hole in ground and go inside. No, this is a metaphor to mean that they chose to hang on to the different things, the different mundane things in this life, whether it's money, position, marriage, house, whatever it is, wealth, all that is included in the metaphor أخلد إلى الأرض. They chose the positions and they chose this dunya. That's what أخلد إلى الأرض. It's a metaphor. They chose the positions. They chose dunya over akhirah, even though لو ولو شئنا لرفعناه بها. If the Lord Almighty had wanted, he would have been risen at a higher rank in this dunya and in the akhirah. He would have been risen in a higher rank. وَاتَّبَعَ هَوَاهُ. So why did this person actually choose the whims and the dunya and every mundane thing on earth? That's because they وَاتَّبَعَ هَوَاهُ, because they followed their whims. They let their whims pave the way to their destination. And when you look at the word ittaba'a, ittaba'a is in the past tense. And then you got the shadda, in where it was one wrong path after another wrong path. One wrong path led to another, and then it becomes a whole sequence of wrong paths without one knowing and realizing. And then it becomes as if it's a gradual thing that they go into, and it was their whims taking them from probably going into not following a certain principle that might start in looking at the haram things, and then later it becomes engaging more into action of it. And then same thing with money. It started with probably giving, halalizing, let's say it that way, and giving one the fatwa that, oh, al-madhab al-Hanafi says it's okay in Dar al-Harb to take riba, even though that's not what al-madhab al-Hanafi actually says. But that interpretation, that fatwa, has found qalban khaliya, has found a heart that was looking for such a fatwa. Why? Because it makes their life easier. And then it becomes, it's okay, I can also buy a car with the same kind of idea. And then it becomes, yeah, it's okay, I can also buy those appliances, and the list goes on. And then it becomes riba after riba. And then the same idea comes with the same halalization of all the different harams out there. It's okay, I can take my hijab to sew a little bit of my bangs. It's okay, I can tighten my hijab a little bit, or my jilbab or my abaya a little bit. It's okay, I can add some more colors. It's okay, I can wear it as a skirt, and then the skirt gets tighter and tighter. It's okay, it doesn't have to be that baggy. And it's okay, and all of a sudden it becomes from a complete hijab to nothing but, what do they call those? Skinny jeans? And some handkerchief, let's call it that way, on the top of the head. Allah al-Musta'an. فمثله كمثل الكلب إن تحمل عليه يلهث أو تتركه يلهث. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala compares those types of people. They're similar. It's a similitude. كمثل الكلب. It is like a dog, where they would actually go panting. They're grasping for air. Whether they get air, or whether they're running, whether they're standing, no matter what, they're panting. They're grasping for air constantly. In other words, these people, they will never be satisfied with anything that they will get in dunya. They will always want more. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala compares them to dogs, that they will want more and more, and they will never be satisfied. The air will never be enough for a dog, and they'll always be panting regardless, grasping for air. And that's exactly for those that are seeking dunya. It will never be enough. They will want this house, and then it becomes a larger house, and then it becomes more dunya. They want one woman, then it becomes two, then it becomes four, then it becomes five, then it goes into haram, then it's not never enough. And then it becomes money and more money and more money, and then it's never enough. It's just like dogs. It's never enough. They will continue to grasp for more and more. ذلك مثل القوم الذين كذبوا بآياتنا. So this is, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, ذلك مثل القوم. This is The same exact pattern, the same exact similitude, very similar, in where those that would deny the signs, the verses, the Lord of the Lord Almighty, they're exactly the same thing. They will look for the surface and they think that by getting more of the surface, they will think that that is their purpose. When in reality, the surface will always be on the surface. In order to get to the purpose, you actually have to consider the signs and the verses and the message of the Lord Almighty. فَقْصُصِ الْقَصَص. Then tell them the stories. فَقْصُص. Say the stories. Give them the paradigms for them to learn from. لَعَلَّهُمْ يَتَفَكَّرُونَ. Maybe that will let them think by looking at the patterns and looking at the stories and learning from the stories that they will not repeat the story and the path of those that had come before them. The story is not a story for entertainment, but is a story to learn from so that they will not commit the same mistake that as those that had committed before them. In other words, that's the story, how the story had begun. How do you complete your character, and where does your character fit within the story? Are you going to commit the same mistakes, or are you going to learn from those mistakes and be amongst those that were successful? May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us from those that will be successful and not commit such mistakes. And Ameen Ya Rabbi. And if anybody would like to comment on anything that I had said, you could unmute yourselves and I would love to hear what you would like to say. So here's the sister saying, the concept of Dar al-Harb, is it only in the madhab mentioned or other madhabs too? So there are a number of different things about Dar al-Harb and Dar al-Islam. Number one is that Dar al-Islam is not Dar al-Islam anymore. Dar al-Harb is not Dar al-Harb anymore. So to apply, first of all, that doesn't apply in today's times. That's number one. Number two, even when we're talking about al-Madhab al-Hanafi, they didn't say that you could actually engage in riba in every Dar al-Harb. They didn't say that you can take riba. There's a difference between if it is opposed onto you, just like auto insurance, in where you cannot drive without having auto insurance, and therefore it is imposed on you. And in that situation, there's a difference. If we are to say generally that riba is permissible in Dar al-Harb, that would mean that I could go to Zainab and say, listen, I gave you $200, and since you delayed paying it back to me, then therefore I can make 200 become 300. That is not what any scholar had ever said. There's a difference between a kafir imposing a riba on me, and I am in a situation where I cannot spare myself, and between me going willingly, again, willingly, and there are other halal alternatives to go to and say, well, it's because of Dar al-Harb. This is not the madhab Hanafi whatsoever. Allah al-Musta'an. Right now we're getting a lot of people that are misunderstanding the madhab and bringing in all these different confusions and then saying that, well, I've got a madhab to support my whims. Allah al-Musta'an. This is nothing but zandaqa. This is zandaqa. Zandaqa is when the person is actually using the deen to support their whims, to support their desires, just to not feel guilty and not have others think that they are guilty. Allah al-Musta'an. Well, this is it for today, and Jazakumullah khairan everyone for attending. We definitely passed our time, but I really wanted to finish this much today. And Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. If anybody would like to add anything, go ahead.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Wa alaikum
جزاك الله خير.
wa iyyakum.